Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. So we're here today for the first in my regular monthly guide series. I'm doing these monthly now thanks to all of you who have decided to pledge to Deep Cuts, to keep Deep Cuts going, so thanks to all of you guys. Also, those of you who have pledged $5 or more before the 1st of August will be entered to win a Deep Cuts goodie bag, which will contain a Tom Waits record on vinyl, a Deep Cuts t-shirt, a Deep Cuts tote, and a thank you letter from me. And I'll send that to wherever in the world that you live. So look out for the winner to be announced on Patreon this week, and look out in your emails for me to send a congratulations to you. If you do want to be involved in future competitions, all you have to do is head over to my Patreon page, and the link is in the description, and pledge $5 or more a month. Today is an exploration through the career of perhaps the most enigmatic American songwriter to have graced our messed up little planet. An individual with a penchant for narrativizing the human experience, an obsession with Jack Kerouac, and a lifetime spanning, shape-shifting discography full of blues, rock, folk, jazz, and experimental sounds. I am, of course, talking about the one, the only, Tom Waits. He embodies the down-and-out troubadour, the grizzled bartender, the failed romantic working as a kitchen porter in a steakhouse, some of these positions of which he has actually had first-hand experience. Lyrically, Waits can be cutting, saccharine, and wickedly funny, all in the space of a few songs. And as you listen through his discography, you get the sense that he's taking you by the hand and pulling you through his many-hued meditations of life in America. And it's a potent journey which, to be honest, you just wish would never end. And lucky you, these cornerstones of Western music are immortalized through his records. Therefore, you can appreciate them and experience these journeys whenever you damn well please. He's an individual who has guarded his personal life fiercely for years, which means trying to get a good understanding of his artistic intentions and thoughts behind some of these records can be particularly difficult, which is why I've spent the last few weeks and months poring through different interviews with him and trying to put together this puzzle which is the man behind this gruff persona. And I don't know if I really got anywhere with that, and I think this is probably the most revealing quote on the matter. Most of the things that people know about me are made up. My own life is backstage, so what you know about me is only what I allow you to know about me. So it's like a ventriloquist act. I'm not one of those people like tabloids chase around. You have to put off that smell. It's like blood in the water for a shark. On the 7th of December 1949, Thomas Allen Waits was born in a small city called Pomona in LA County, California. Both of his parents were teachers, and neither of them were particularly into music other than his dad, who was into mariachi music and Mexican music, so there was a lot of that playing in the house, but nothing much else. And as Waits got older and became more enamored by the American traditions of music from the 20th century, he felt a widening divide happening between him and his family. Too many teachers in my family. Teachers and ministers. I wanted to break windows, smoke cigars, and stay up late, you know. My role model was Pinocchio, you know, the little kid that went to Pleasure Island and shot pool. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to Pleasure Island. His attraction to R&B, blues music, gospel, jazz grew alongside this interest in the beat generation of writers, people like Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, William S. Burroughs. And it's interesting because for someone who's born in this time, these interests seemed like a bit of a rejection of the 60s hippie culture. He was far more interested in the post-war stylistics and aesthetics than what was going on in his own generation. Someone who claims he didn't get jack shit out of school, Waits says that he learnt more about life from the jobs that he did after he left, whether that is working in a pizza place until 3 a.m, listening to what the patrons have to say and writing down interesting little phrases. He worked as a fireman, a coast guard. It's little wonder that his lyricism feels so alive with humanistic portraits of people, because the man really did live before he properly started writing his music. All the while he's learning piano and refining his songwriting skills, influenced by the poetic approaches of Bob Dylan, Charles Bukowski. He worked as a bouncer at a nightclub for a while as well. I know, another job. And whilst he was there, he would listen to the artists playing on stage and would gain inspiration from them. From there on, he started playing at Hoot Nights in San Diego. Hoot Nights are basically open mic nights, and that would give a feel for what it was like to play in front of a live audience. His musical journey really began though where he started to travel to the Troubadour in West Hollywood to play. This was a place where there were Hoot Nights, but you had to get there at 10 a.m. just to have your 4-song, 15-minute shot at fame. It was a make or break place by the sounds of it, and I imagine careers were made and broken. And there was certainly a career made, because in 1972, a young Tom Waits was up on stage playing, and who was in the audience but David Geffen, the legendary music mogul. I mean, the rest is history, which we will come to talk about, of course, because that's the point of this video. A deal was struck between Geffen and Waits' manager Herb Cohen, who was also managing Frank Zappa and Tim Buckley. And with that, Tom Waits' debut record Closing Time was released in 1973 on Asylum Records. Taking 4 weeks to record, Closing Time contains only the teeniest hint of a rasping vocal, which would come to be a defining trait in the Tom Waits experience. This is a voice which is still trying to find some of its confidence in a very solid collection of piano and guitar-led folky ballads. It's a record tinged with melancholy, sounding like a product of the experience Tom Waits was having at the time. It sounds like his surroundings. You've got the dusty clubs, the barflies, the wistful feelings over love and opportunities long lost. Old 55 is Waits' debut single and also the opening track of Closing Time, and it's a wonderfully schmaltzy piano ballad which details him driving back from his lover's apartment early in the morning. Famously, the Eagles covered this track, so if you've heard this track, you might have heard the Eagles version, which Waits at one time called antiseptic and said the band was like watching paint dry. Ouch. He probably made a wedge out of it though, and also he did later retract that statement apparently. That melancholy is teased out on I Hope I Don't Fall in Love with You, with Waits' plucked guitar chords and distant harmonium with lines like, well, I hope that I don't fall in love with you, because falling in love just makes me blue. Grapefruit Moon is a gorgeous track, and interestingly it's the track that made David Geffen sit down and take notice in 1972 when he was at the Troubadour. He was about to leave, Tom started playing Grapefruit Moon, and he thought, I need to see what this is about. So it's got a legacy, this track. Its power is in its simplicity, fusty double bass picking out the root notes over the violin following that languid piano performance. It's actually a record with a lot of variety musically. Lonely evokes the most low-lit cocktail bar you could possibly imagine, resplendent in its sadness, but then you have a track like Ice Cream Man, which is this sleazeball blues swinger with Waits boasting, I got a cherry popsicle right on time, a big stick, mama, that will blow your mind. Perhaps a record that gets overlooked often because of his later, more experimental works, Closing Time is an intelligent, poignant record with depth. A cracking debut. Despite the poor sales of Closing Time, in 1974 Asylum put out The Heart of Saturday Night, Tom Waits' sophomore record, and a title which references Jack Kerouac, a writer who he thinks so much about and has read so much of. And on this record he works with the great Bones Howe, who engineers and produces the record and actually helps Tom find his sound. Waits was apparently in awe of Howe, who not only had a very strong ear for jazz, but also told Waits that he reminded him of his idol. I told him I thought this music and lyrics had a Kerouac quality to them, and he was blown away that I knew who Jack Kerouac was. I told him I also played jazz drums and he went wild. As great as Closing Time is, the pull of Waits' formidable vocal isn't there yet. He hasn't quite found that. He's still trying to find his voice. And with The Heart of Saturday Night, Bones Howe saw a lot of potential in him, I think, and had a better way of processing that voice and getting a little bit closer to that voice that we would recognise. On The Heart of Saturday Night, the occasionally unsure crooner we heard in the previous record is replaced with a deep, soulful voice, a baritone, which feels as if it commands the music more than just being swept along by it, which is what occasionally feels like when you listen to Closing Time. Of course, his voice is still about to go through so many different changes. This really is only the beginning, but it definitely does signal a change, this record. Even down to the press release, Waits is poetic, capturing that title and the idea of people living one day at a time, one drink at a time, in the dirty smog of the LA evening. The blur drizzle down the plate glass and a neon swizzle stick stirs up the night air as a cubal maverick of a moon rolls across an obsidian sky and the bus is groaning and wheezing at the corner of Restless Boulevard and Midnight Road. It's very Bukowski. I advise you to check out his Hot Water Music collection of short stories if you want more narratives with that kind of sleazy LA atmosphere. This record, a concept about the great American Saturday night, collects the feelings of possibility, longing and bitterness that can be felt in these moments. Written in a couple of weeks, it's rowdy, seedy, but it also doesn't lose that forlorn quality that was in Closing Time. A track like Fumbling with the Blues rattles along really nicely. Semi-Sweet is a track that displays a tight band relishing in the dejected yet uplifting quality of the blues. Drunk on the Moon with its inebriated lyrics, and I'm blinded by the neon. Don't try and change my tune, 'cause I thought I heard a saxophone. I'm drunk on the moon. Third album, Nighthawks at the Diner, was released a year later in 1975, and this was a bit of an experiment, an attempt to try and capture the live feeling of Tom Waits performing. It's something that Bones Howe was keen to do, so what he did is he basically invited a load of people to the LA Record Plant studios and mocked up a fake live performance. I mean, it is technically a live performance with people cheering in the background, etc., but it's almost like a performance of a performance because this wasn't the recording of a real gig. It's a bit of a strange one. Not a release I return to all that often, but I do think it's an important one, twofold. One, Waits starts slipping even more into his groove with that vocal delivery, and you can really start to hear it on Nighthawks at the Diner. And also, you hear him lighting up the crowd with his onstage antics, talking to the crowd, bouncing off of them, and I think that's a big part of who he is as a performer, and he's backed by this fantastic jazz band. It's a delight to hear the audience cracking up on his introductions, or on A Foggy Night. Some of the introductions to these tracks, they just have this gleaming personality, and it's quite a revelation in some ways because you sort of wish that this personality was more present on a record like Closing Time or Heart of Saturday Night. This is the sound of a natural born performer, a man who cut his teeth on stage in front of a crowd of people. So even though it might be simulated as a release, I still think it's important to hear it. So we reach 1976 and Waits' fourth record, Small Change, in this fan's opinion, his first proper masterpiece. Whilst Waits had been surrounding himself with competent jazz and blues musicians on these earlier recordings, Small Change is a little bit more economic in its construction. On a lot of these tracks you have Waits' foregrounded voice, which is now even more gravelly in its tone, and simple piano, and these two things really successfully transmit the sorrowful feeling of the record. If I talked about Closing Time and The Heart of Saturday Night having an air of sadness about them, well, Small Change takes that idea and absolutely runs a mile with it. Waits has talked about the fact that at this stage in his career he wasn't a very happy person. He was touring a lot around all these American cities, he was drinking so much, and this was making him unhappy, and I think a lot of that comes across on this record. But it's also the first record that really properly spotlights his voice. It underlines his elastic lyricism, which is at times humorous and then cuttingly poignant at others. On the opening track, Tom Trauber's Blues, a beautiful string section backs a lachrymose Waits and piano. Wasted and wounded, it ain't what the moon did. Got what I paid for now. See you tomorrow. Hey Frank, can I borrow a couple of bucks from you to go waltzing Matilda? Waltzing Matilda. You'll go waltzing Matilda with me. An ode to the lovesick down and out, Bones Howe tells the story of this song's creation like this. Tom Waits apparently went all the way to downtown LA to a place called Skid Row, which has one of the largest homeless populations in a whole of America. He bought a pint of rye, got horrendously drunk, talked to all these different people that were living here on the streets, went back home, threw up, and wrote this song. And supposedly all of the people that he spoke to, all of the men that he spoke to that were living on the streets were there because of some kind of romantic predicament. They were there because of love. That abject sadness continues on a track like Bad Liver and a Broken Heart in Lowell, an ode to his hero Kerouac, with lyrics on alcoholism that managed to be funny and despairing in equal measure. Well, I got a bad liver and a broken heart. Yeah, I drunk me a river since you tore me apart. And I don't have a drinking problem, except when I can't get a drink. But I don't just want to paint this record as a sad boy fest, because that's not what it is. There are real moments of humour, like on the track Step Right Up, which is just brilliant. Waits performs over a double bass, brushed swung snare rhythms and wayward noodling sax, and he basically just performs this litany of commercial promises and advertising slogans like a drunken carny. It gets rid of embarrassing age spots, it delivers a pizza and it lengthens and it strengthens, and it finds that slipper that's been at large under the Chez Lounge for several weeks, and it plays a mean rhythm master, it makes excuses for unwanted lipstick on your collar, and it's only $1, step right up, it's only $1, step right up, because it forges your signature. On the ballad The Piano Has Been Drinking, Waits humanises the surroundings of his earlier records as they break down and die in front of him. The piano has been drinking, my necktie is asleep, and the combo went back to New York. The jukebox has to take a leak. There is also a hilarious line that always kills me, because the bouncer is a sumo wrestler, cream puff Casper milk toast, and the owner is a mental midget with the IQ of a fence post. Brilliant record. Small Change established Waits as an artist to be reckoned with, and can we just also note that he's been releasing records every year since '73. That is some work ethic, and even when those records start to slow down in the 90s, he's working on films and plays and all sorts of other things. Like, this is a man that loves his art and is tirelessly working at it. Foreign Affairs, the next record released in 1977, also being produced by Bones Howe, because at this point they've really struck up a strong working relationship and are bouncing off each other very well. The album feels noirish, as that record cover hints at. There's something cinematic and golden age Hollywood about these compositions. On the duet with Bette Midler, I Never Talk to Strangers, with that string section and the back and forth between the two, you can almost imagine Bogart sitting in the darkest corner of the bar, nursing an old-fashioned and a cigarette and looking longingly out across the patrons. Of the few things we know about Waits' personal life, Bette Midler's recounting of visiting his home one day is a hilarious insight into this madcap and strange troubadour. Tom lives, well, sort of knee-deep in grunge, so he was reluctant for me to see his apartment. I kept after him till he finally invited me over. He acted ultra shy at first, but he finally ushered me around, and he's got his piano in the kitchen, and he only uses the kitchen range to light his cigarettes. And then there's this refrigerator where he keeps his hammers and wrenches and bolts and stuff like that. He opened the fridge door, and with an absolute poker face he said, "I got some cool tools in here." You ever heard a cornier line than that? I howled for an hour, and we've been buddies ever since. Is this method writing? As a semi-successful cult figure in music, surely he didn't have to live like this. But it's almost as if his musical world of squalor was his home, so therefore he wanted to live in it. Tracks like Burma Shave and the title track Foreign Affairs display Waits' continuing interest in the piano ballad, evoking the smoky darkness, spotlight on the stage, patrons laughing and drinking and crying. In 1978, Waits begins his impressive list of film credits with an appearance in the film Paradise Alley starring Sylvester Stallone. He plays Mumbles the piano player. Apparently it was a part that was actually based on him, so a nice easy part to play. Whilst this film isn't particularly important, what's more important is on the set for this film, he met Kathleen Brennan, someone who he would fall in love with, get married to, have children with, and have an incredible music collaborative relationship with. Kathleen Brennan is so incredibly important to Waits' artistic progression. I cannot even begin to put it into words. I will try over the course of the rest of this video, but she is so important, as you will come to see. She convinced Waits to stop drinking and to expand his musical expression. This doesn't quite happen yet because we're still in 1978, and the next few records still are part of that inebriated, smoky, jazz piano, forlorn drunkard sound. That's a lot of words, but you get what I mean. Also in 1978, Blue Valentine is released, a record which at this point is tempting to call Waitsian. I mean, by this time he has carved out a very specific songwriting and lyrical aesthetic, one which is entirely his own, and I think Blue Valentine is a really great example of him finely tuning these ideas. Opening with a cover of Somewhere from West Side Story, it's a very impassioned way of starting a record, and it's a level of romanticism that Waits himself criticised in later years. I was overly maudlin and romantic, and I hadn't really grown up. I still very much lived in a fantasy world. Blue Valentine contains one of the best Tom Waits tracks ever, Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis. It's a tranquil piano piece which narrates a prostitute sending a letter to her ex-lover Charlie, saying how she's given up the drink and the drugs, she's on the straight and narrow. And then by the final verse, she breaks down and admits that all of that was a lie and really she just needs money to be bailed out of jail. It's gut-wrenching and it's a perfect example of the Waitsian songwriting approach. The bluesy $29 is a great track, the stomping whistling past the graveyard, just another solid record. In the next year, Heartattack and Vine is released, which has come to be known as a sort of transition record for Tom Waits' musical style. Brennan apparently introduced Waits to Captain Beefheart. That gives you a real inkling into how instrumental she was in expanding his musical expression, turning him from that Waitsian barfly to the iconoclast of sounds in his later years. Brennan was therefore a huge source of inspiration for Heartattack and Vine, which was recorded a month before they got married. This also marks the last record that Bones Howe produces. Waits felt as if they were turning into a bit of an old married couple, and it was all a little bit stale, so this was the last thing that they ever worked on together. The Golden Age Hollywood film score runs through Waits' folk ballads on this record. I think that's a hangover from Foreign Affairs, as with the incredibly schmaltzy Saving My Love for You and Jersey Girl, a track which is actually often covered live by Bruce Springsteen. What became his most popular record to date, I'm not actually a particularly big fan of Heartattack and Vine. There are some really solid tracks on this record, and I like the change up of instrumentals. There's a lot more organ tones on this record, which again slowly is starting to expand his musical palette, something he'll use way more in the 80s to even greater effect, I think. The organ tones on Downtown Until the Money Runs Out, and I think Ruby's Arms, the finale of the record, might be one of the best brass orchestral tinged ballads that Waits has done in his entire career. But sandwiched in the middle of early classics like Small Change and his more aggressively strange 80s output, this one's just always really fallen through the cracks for me. In '82, Waits composed the soundtrack for One from the Heart, a Francis Ford Coppola film that everyone pretty much widely despises, unfortunately. He actually pulled a lot of the prints from the cinema a fortnight after it came out because people disliked it that much and he was embarrassed by it. But it was a project that further thrusted Waits into the limelight because he received an Oscar nomination for Best Song. So Waits really is not a small cult figure anymore. People have heard of him, and his reputation would only grow more and more into the 80s. It does kind of feel like Waits had done to death this version of the smoky, nocturnal LA aesthetic. There are moments in this soundtrack that teeter on self-parody, perhaps, a kind of staleness that probably comes from doing the same thing over and over again for a number of years. But that 80s reinvention was bubbling beneath the surface, not just from his collaborations with his wife Kathleen Brennan, but he also said goodbye to Herb Cohen and the people at Asylum Records, deciding that he really needed a fresh approach on things. So we have made it through what is fittingly known as Tom Waits' Asylum years. What next? Waits signed with Island Records and released Swordfishtrombones in 1983. An absolute masterpiece, and I don't think there are any people out there who would contest that. What could be perceived as a staleness in songwriting approach on One from the Heart and Heartattack and Vine gets obliterated by Swordfishtrombones. You know, the minor changes that happened in the previous record seem so minute in comparison to this album, to what Waits does on this album, a record which is seen as a full-blown collaboration between him and Brennan. The music of this record steps away from the jazz cafe of 70s Waits. It pulls out all of the drunken messes from the bar. It puts them in the middle of the street, hands them an instrument, and parades them up and down the city, creating this bizarre record bursting with harmonium, freedom bell, marimbas, a bass drum with rice in it, banjo, Hammond organ, an orchestra of misfits parading through a dilapidated carnival, their instruments as rusty and neglected as the ancient fairground attractions surrounding them. Often this has been described as junkyard percussion, and I think that's a particularly apt description. The opening track, Underground, wastes no time in establishing this world, a very percussion-heavy marching band piece with brass that sounds really slightly flat. Waits saw this track as a kind of Russian march. It was originally an opportunity for me to chronicle the behaviour of a mutant dwarf community and give it a feeling of a Russian march. People banging on steam pipes, 1,000 boots coming down on a wood floor at the same time. I originally saw this as the theme for some late-night activity in the steam tunnels beneath New York City, where allegedly there are entire communities of ladies and gentlemen living under difficult circumstances beneath the subway. I think Paul Marr Jr., who wrote the book Tom Waits on Tom Waits, put it really succinctly, this change in Waits' songwriting approach. The lyrics of Swordfishtrombones boasted an abstraction absent from earlier songs. Indeed, they hinted at the same type of characters, though some were less depicted in real-world scenarios, but instead shone through a surreal prism of theatrical exaggeration. Similarly, downtrodden people in situations injected with a pathos and a humour, but this newfound approach just makes it all the more compelling. Waits' vocal delivery is more theatrical too, which absolutely fits this change in approach. It's deeper, there's whispers, there's yelps, you can almost hear his Cheshire grin as he spouts these delicious lines. And aside from experimenting more with his vocals, he experiments more with the instruments as well. You have the Hammond B3 organ on the instrumental track Dave the Butcher, which revels in this dissonance alongside a drum called a boobam. Frank's Wild Years is a brilliant piece of dark storytelling. Once again, the Hammond organ solos underneath Waits, telling a story about the fact that it's the little things that drive men mad. Well, Frank settled down in his valley and he hung his wild years on a nail that he drove through his wife's forehead. Rather terrifyingly, in an interview, Waits said, "I think there's a little bit of Frank in everybody." I hope not. It's a short track, something Waits would begin to play with more and more, and this morbid humour perfectly suits the new carnivalesque macabre marching band. Such a fantastic record and a truly original piece of work. No one sounds like this. There are a couple of other releases in 85 and 86 which came out of contractual obligations between Waits and Asylum Records, basically cash grabs from the label, and Waits wasn't happy about them at all. One of them was called Anthology of Tom Waits, another one was called The Asylum Years, and he really did make sure to not promote them at all. So how does one follow up a daringly original record like Swordfishtrombones? Well, probably with an equally incredible album called Rain Dogs, released in 1985. In a remarkable musical transformation, the artist, synonymous with beat jazz cafes and crooning folk ballads, so all of a sudden becomes an artist that defies categorization. And this continues on Rain Dogs, an album which doubles down on the stomping blues of Swordfishtrombones and that junkyard percussion marching band sound. Incidentally, this album also has some of the best tracks in his entire discography. The opener, Singapore, recalls Underground from Swordfishtrombones. It has the junkyard percussion, but this time the marching band isn't a marching band, it's a bunch of sailors on shore leave getting ready to raise hell. We sail tonight for Singapore, we're all as mad as hatters here. I've fallen for a tawny Moor, took off to the land of Nod. Loosely, the concept of Rain Dogs is a well-trodden one. The lives of people living on the street, prostitutes, cab drivers, bartenders, this time in New York rather than LA. The photo used for the cover art is from a collection by Swedish photographer Anders Peterson, and although this looks very much like Tom Waits, it isn't. Just an absolute dead ringer for him. Again, although this concept is a well-worn Waitsian one, the abstract lyricism from Swordfishtrombones is again here on Rain Dogs. As an example, some of the lyrics on Clap Hands. Shine, shine, a Roosevelt dime, all the way to Baltimore and running out of time. Salvation Army seemed to wind up in the hole. They all went to heaven in a little rowboat. The references to presidents and nursery rhymes adds a depth, but it's a depth that's been there before, but it feels all the more witty alongside this iconoclastic music and his malevolent whisper. He genuinely sounds like Satan on this track. Big Black Mariah features Keith Richards on guitar, and he completely understood what Waits was going, and he adds his bluesy licks to this southern New Orleans stomp, the lyrics likely talking about a funeral. The detail in his words on Ninth and Hennepin makes for such a vibrant visual palette. As the clock ticks out like a dripping faucet, till you're full of rag water and bitters and blue ruin, and you spill out over the side to anyone who will listen. And I've seen it all through the yellow windows of the evening train. Waits' colourful lyrical universe is ironically difficult for me to explain in words. I think it's best epitomised by something he tells Richard Rayner in an interview in 1985, where he's sitting on a New York subway train and he hears this drunken woman singing "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head," but she keeps adding expletives into it. I never liked that Bacharach tune before, but now it's become a song for me. I'd never heard it handled in quite that way. It's great when a song gets absorbed like that, because that's where you want to end up, to be part of the fabric, part of the life that goes on around you with your songs. As madcap as Rain Dogs can feel, it's lived in ragged expressionism with the anachronisms, the spluttering and the spit feel more honest and real than many other records that stay closer to convention. Amazing, sprawling LP. I don't have time to mention all of Waits' acting appearances in this video, but I do want to quickly mention 1986's Down by Law, directed by Jim Jarmusch, because one, it fits in nicely with the tone of Rain Dogs, I think, and two, it's one of my favourite films of all time. It's just this brilliant, humorous, poignant black and white jail caper, and I think that if you don't love it, you have no heart. Now we're in 1987, next LP, Frank's Wild Years, is seen as the finale of a trilogy that started off with Swordfishtrombones. I've heard being billed as a rags to rags tale, which I think is particularly apt. Frank's Wild Years was actually a musical play written by Waits and Brennan. It had a 3-month run in 1986, and Waits was in the starring role. When the curtain dropped, he decided to take some of the music and flesh out the concept, which eventually became the record Frank's Wild Years. Every bit as good as the two albums preceding it, Frank's Wild Years continues along the same path musically, has this very large band, lots of wild instrumentation, pump organ, glockenspiel, orchestral bells, and most of this was done by the band that were part of the musical play. But alongside this, Waits flew in Mark Ribbett to incorporate his compelling guitar work, which was such a big sound on Rain Dogs. One thing I haven't touched on much is Waits' interest in vaudeville, something which he talked about in an anti-press release in 2008. So much mashing of cultures and bizarre hybrids, Delta blues guitarists and Hawaiian artists thrown together, resulting in the adoption of the slide guitar as a language we all take for granted as African American. but it was a cross-pollination, like most culture. The vaudevillian entertainer, the mash of cultural epithets, is so clearly realised on this trilogy of records, perhaps even more tightly on Frank's Wild Years. Hang On St. Christopher is a killer opener, a stonking beat and rasping brass. Welcome Waits' voice, which is hollow and sits much further back in the mix than you're usually used to. The theatrical orchestration of Blow Wind Blow throws together those orchestral bells and plucked banjo. I swear I was riding on a field mouse. I was dancing in the slaughterhouse. If you swing along the beltway, then you skid along the all day, because I went a little crazy. Way Down in the Hole will be familiar for those of you who have watched HBO's The Wire, a southern blues slow burn with vocals that evoke gospel in the telling of Jesus and the devil. And these are things that Waits writes about without being a religious person. What he's doing is he's taking on the character of an evangelist. I'll Take New York is a cacophonous listen that threatens to crash and burn throughout. The dissonance of the organ makes this genuinely difficult to listen to. It's brash and precocious, often overlooked in comparison to the other two records, but it shouldn't be whatsoever because it's a fantastic piece of work. This would be his last studio record for 5 years. In 1988, we get the Big Time live record, which is absolutely worth a listen to just get a comparison between Nighthawks at the Diner, which was the simulated live performance, and then this, which really captures him at his artistic zenith. You get all of these great tracks from the last few records put in the live arena, and we know already from what I've been talking about how Tom Waits' music comes alive on stage. The nightmarish version of Big Black Maria is worth listening out for, as is the solo version of Ruby's Arms. Waits appeared in a glut of films and stage appearances, none of which I'm particularly going to go into here, but in 1991 he did the original soundtrack for the Jim Jarmusch film Night on Earth. Obviously they are now friends and collaborators after Down by Law was such a success in the indie film scene, such a lovely film, and it's almost completely instrumental, but you can hear Waits obsessing over every single minute sound on this record. That screeching feedback guitar on Los Angeles Mood is one I often think of, or the unsurprisingly Parisian Paris Mood. Which leads us to August 1992, where we get another masterpiece called Bone Machine. I don't know if he ever really managed to top Bone Machine. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are fantastic records after this, but there's just something so lofty and grandiose about this record. It's quite a difficult listen. It's almost industrial without really incorporating the traditional industrial sounds you might think of when you think of the term industrial. You know, every second feels pitch perfectly realized. It slightly shifts the Waits sound and incorporates more metallic dissonance, which perfectly fits alongside his grizzled vocals. Seriously, you need to go back and listen to Closing Time and then listen to this record, and you really see the shift in his vocal delivery. It's quite startling. With this stripped framework, Waits' lyrical themes are more morbid, more focused on mortality than ever before. I mean, just listen to that first track, The Earth Died Screaming, you know, the title, if that wasn't enough of an inkling for you anyway. It's a great 1-2 punch, this track. There's this jangly percussion in the verse, and this booming chorus, which features a wailing turn from Waits, and also Les Claypool from Primus on electric bass. Second track, Dirt in the Ground, is another all-time great Tom Waits track with gentle woodwind and bass that rasps just as much as Waits' vocals, along to fragile piano chords, and the lyrics ring throughout. What does it matter? A dream of love or a dream of lies? We're all going to be the same place when we die. Your spirit don't leave knowing your face or your name, and the wind through your bones is all that remains. There's no better instrumental to accompany the idea that we'll eventually all just be dirt in the ground. Is this apocalyptic blues? It's macabre as hell. I mean, just listen to the ocean, which sounds just as submerged as the title suggests, with this spectral whisper of a spoken word that will likely chill you to your bones. Tracks like In the Colosseum with that junkyard percussion prove the fact that Tom Waits is always moving forward as an artist. In the hands of other artists, this might sound trite that he keeps using these quite anachronistic sounds, but he always wraps them in new ideas and themes, and he does the same thing again on this disturbing but at times beautiful record. Waits won Best Alternative Album at the Grammys for this album, which apparently he hated with all of his heart. He flipped out when he got the Grammy. He hated that. Alternative to what? What the hell does that mean? In 1993, The Black Rider is released, another theatrical crossover. Waits co-wrote a play of the same name with William S. Burroughs, one of his heroes in the writing world. If you've never heard of William S. Burroughs before, you need to go and read The Naked Lunch and then go and cry. The play was based on a German opera called Der Freischuss, and I probably haven't pronounced that correctly, so if you're German, let me know. And you get a sense of the madness in the tracks on this record. Waits doing a vampiric accent on the track Black Rider, really getting into the characterization on this track. I mean, it's true that the record sounds like some sort of twisted version of Fiddler on the Roof with its folk melodies and foot stomps, and I'm sure in conjunction with the play itself it works really well, but it's never been a release that I've managed to really get into. I feel like I'm missing out on something because I haven't seen the play. So I want to ask you all, if any of you have actually had a chance to see the play being performed, and I know it was put on stage last year, please let me know how it was and what your thoughts are on this record based on having seen it. Big break between studio LPs now, with nothing until 1999. Fans were rewarded with Mule Variations though, an even grimier record than Bone Machine, some kind of portrait of American pastoral life littered with the kind of Waitsian reprobates we've come to know and love. This record also marks Waits' departure from Island Records and his move to Anti, which is a subdivision of Epitaph. In an interview with Time Out New York in 1999, Brett Martin asks Waits if the title Mule Variations serves as a direction for the ideas in these compositions. Halfway through the record you start riffing on something and titles emerge out of the work somehow. Some of the songs had what we started calling a rural quality. They're kind of surrural, a combination of surreal and rural. They sound like old songs, and I sound like an old guy. I mean, yes, they all have that anachronistic quality that Waits' music has always had, but it's the way that he frames it all that makes it feel frighteningly present. The overdrive on Waits' vocal on opening Big in Japan makes it sound as if he's singing 2 different octaves, unless he's actually double-tracked 2 different octaves, but I can never tell. It's like sandpaper on the mic, and it's all the stranger when you have these bright Blues Brothers-esque brass tones in the background. There's just a real strange juxtaposition happening there. Get Behind the Mule is such a sonically lush track with blues harp, Smokey Hormel's guitar, and flat percussion. One of the all-time great spoken word pieces. What's He Building in There is a track that I included on my Halloween playlist last year, and for good reason. Waits plays this character called The Voice, who's wondering what his neighbour is building in his garage. And this spoken word, which is just so wonderfully performed by Waits, is interjected with these pots and pans, screeches, the tuning of a radio. It is quite horrific. Now, what's that sound from under the door? He's pounding nails into a hardwood floor, and I swear to God I heard someone moaning low. Another Grammy recognition for this album, he won Best Folk Album, which I'm sure he was delighted by. 2002 was a busy year for Tom releases, putting out 2 records, one called Blood Money and one called Alice. Alice was written about a decade previously. The tracks were used for a play called Alice, which was about the writer Lewis Carroll and his strange obsession with a little girl called Alice Liddell, who was the inspiration for his Alice in Wonderland books. Blood Money is another theatrical crossover as well, based on a play called Wojciech, I don't know how to say that word. Both of these plays featured the direction of Robert Wilson, who worked on The Black Rider with Waits and Brennan. As a double bill, these records are dark and pessimistic affairs, Blood Money taking the darkness of Bone Machine and Mule Variations and going even further with it in some respects. Everything Goes to Hell is a track that epitomizes this. A woman when she weeps, a merchant when he swears, a thief who says he'll pay, a lawyer when he cares, a snake when he is sleeping, a drunkard when he prays. I don't believe you go to heaven when you're good. Everything goes to hell anyway. So not only do we all end up as dirt in the ground, as the Bone Machines track told us, but we also are all going to go to hell anyway. Cool. Cheers, Tom. The track God's Away on Business has the junkyard percussion, the carnivalesque brass lead, and Waits is sowing this tale of people asking for redemption, but they're never going to get it. All the while, of course, these instrumentals stop Waits' lyrics from ever feeling too heavy. There's like a vulgarity to it, a garish grin. It's like, we're all going to go down with the ship, so we may as well make the most of it. As a record, it absolutely succeeds with that dark tone, embodying the Faustian tale that it's based on. As a contrast, Alice is a much sadder, dejected affair. For the most part, that garish grin is gone and Waits is just looking down at his feet. The subject matter is something I've already touched on, which is the fact that Lewis Carroll, the writer, had a sick obsession with a young girl, and it inspired him to write his book Alice in Wonderland. So already we're into much more uncomfortable, also real territory. Now, this is a thing that actually happened, so we can't abstract it, and we have to remember that when we listen to these songs. There is something even more otherworldly about Alice, and I think a lot of that is down to Waits experimenting with his musical instrumentation, like using a Stroh violin on No One Knows I'm Gone, and you could say that it's a more romantic sound, but because of the subject matter, it gives a disturbing sheen on everything that we're listening to. These forlorn pieces, they do sound otherworldly, although not completely of a different world. They sound like pieces of American history blasted through a prism, and what comes out is this strange landscape that's kind of nightmarish and disturbing. The title track, Alice, is one of these tracks, with intimate, breathy saxophone played by none other than Colin Stetson, who, if you've watched this channel a lot, you know I think is a wonderful musician. He joins a crooning Waits and helps create an atmosphere that's very uncomfortable, because the lyricism is something that, if you read on a page, sounds like a fairly standard love story. And so a secret kiss brings madness with the bliss, and I will think of this when I'm dead in my grave. Until you realise this is written from Lewis Carroll's perspective about young Alice Liddell, and then the entire thing is a particularly uncomfortable thing to listen to. I'm Still Here is a great Waits piano ballad. We're All Mad Here would easily fit in on Rain Dogs. I just think this is a fantastic record. Both of these albums are so strong. He just rarely puts a foot wrong, does Tom Waits. So we're in 2004 now, and we get Tom Waits' Beatbox record. What the hell, I hear you ask? Real Gone is a hell of a lot of fun. It's less serious than Alice and Blood Money, and it's nice to have a slightly more irreverent tone on a Tom Waits record again. Waits and Brennan hold up in an old schoolhouse in Mississippi with a host of brilliant musicians, including Casey Waits, their son, on turntables. Yeah, turntables on a Tom Waits record. It surprised me when I first heard it. And Mark Ribot back on guitar, among many countless other talented musicians. In an anti-press release prior to the record coming out, Waits wrote this: songs about mama, liquor, trains and death, politics, rats, war, hangings, dancing, pirates, farms, the carnival and sinning. In other words, the same old dirty business. There's a real clattering blues feeling raging through this album, so much bravado emanating from every track. Most interestingly, no piano on this record, which is the first time ever on a Tom Waits record. Instead, he allows the band to create these funky maelstroms around him as he performs like this raggedy preacher in a tornado. Hoist That Rag is a track that shows how interested Waits has become in Latin flavours. This track somehow straddles the line between cardinal blues licks, a funky swagger, whilst retaining a Latin rhythm. It's a wonderful track. This record feels breakneck. It's got so much life in it. If you just listen to the first track, Top of the Hill, with Casey Waits' turntabling, the puffing of a beatboxing Tom Waits, and then you have the distant blues licks of Mark Ribot trying to keep the whole track together. Make It Rain is a stonker of a track with a little wink wink nudge nudge moment about the familiarity of this narrative. She took all my money and my best friend. You know the story. Here it comes again. Definitely one of the most fun Tom Waits records, I think. It's just a blast from start to finish, and this late into his career, still just refusing to sit down and play it safe. The next release is 2006's Orphans, Brawlers, Ballers and Bastards. This was an embarrassment of riches, this record. It's a 56-song, 3-CD release containing a myriad of different Tom Waits styles, some tracks rare, many of them new, and people could not believe quite how much material was being dumped on them at once. Unfortunately, I don't really have the time to do this release much justice on this video. I wanted to delve into it, but I want to try and cover everything, so I'm going to keep it fairly brief. But in terms of those 3 CDs, Bastards is the one that I've always been drawn to more than anything else, because it has some of the more iconoclastic spoken word pieces from Waits, which are some of the best things that he's done. A track like Children's Story, for example, just this odd spoken word with clarinets soloing around his vocal performance. Dog Door is a rock track that could have gone on Real Gone. It's just really bass heavy, and I wonder if Casey Waits has had anything to do with the instrumentation on this track, because it's quite an unusual palette for a Tom Waits song. Because I haven't got time to talk about it much, I want to know what your favourite tracks off of Orphans are, and we will discuss it in the comments section. Let's have a chat about it. In the interest of getting to experience live Tom Waits later on in his career, I would absolutely suggest you check out 2009's Glitter and Doom, a live album taking performances from his tour, and you get to hear live renditions of I'll Shoot the Moon, Singapore, and Dirt in the Ground. It's great to hear. Which brings us to the final Tom Waits record, or indeed the final Tom Waits record to date. We can all hope we're going to get something else from him. But for now, 2011's Bad As Me. Bad As Me takes that riotous energy of Real Gone and it supercharges it. It's an album full of bluesy barn burners, screeching organs, pounding drums, and Tom sounding as invigorated as ever. I actually think Bad As Me is up there with the best Tom Waits records. It's a Swordfishtrombones, a Rain Dogs, a Small Change, a Bone Machine. I think it's a lean synthesis of the man's inimitable character, his patchwork quilt of American culture, and that voice. With an impressive stack of features including Keith Richards once again, Mark Rybert, Les Claypool, David Hidalgo, Larry Taylor, this album just oozes with wit, vim, and vigour. Face to the Highway is a gorgeous low-key track with church bells and gentle guitar, and it's one of my favourite Waits vocal performances in years. Ocean wants a sailor, gun wants a hand, money wants a spender, and the road wants a man. I turned my face to the highway, and I turned my back on you. Chicago's brass just bursts through this track, and it's a track that I have to endlessly turn up and up and up because I just can't get enough of it. And Mark Rybert and Keith Richards' blues guitar work is so great on this track, and it's a sound that is littered throughout the entirety of Bad As Me. That guitar just fills the scape again on Kiss Me, a perfect accompaniment to the dusty warble of Waits. Hell Broke Loose has to be mentioned for its percussive claps and stomps. Waits' vocal chords sound as if they're going to split. You have overdriven guitar chords, soulful backing vocals, and lyrically, Waits is talking about the fetishization of the US military. I had a good home, but I left, right, left. That big fucking bomb made me deaf, deaf. A Humvee mechanic put his Kevlar on wrong. I guarantee you'll meet up with a suicide bomb. Hell broke loose. Hell broke loose. A late, great masterpiece. If this does end up being the final Tom Waits record, it's a brilliant one to end on. And that's it. I've been extensive as I can. I know I've had to cut a few corners because I didn't want the guide to be 2 hours long. There's so much information on Tom Waits that you could fill several books which have already been written. There is so much information out there. I want to share my love for Tom Waits with you, so please in the comments section tell me your favourite Tom Waits record, your favourite thing about Tom Waits, why you are so enamoured with his music. As one final note, in an interview back in 1975 with Todd Everett of the LA Free Press, he said something which always sticks out in my mind. It's the perfect synthesis of his artistic melisma. But I'm not a big star. I'm not even a twinkle. I'm just a rumour. Please come and join me on the Deep Cuts Discord on Tuesday at 10 o'clock BST to listen to Tom Waits' Bone Machine. That's going to be a great one to do a listening party for. Please come and join me. As I've already said, please comment down below with your favourite Tom Waits record. Let's get some discussions going about the great man. Thanks for watching as always. See you next week.